more than 50 kids have suffered from lead poisoning, potentially linked to popular applesauce pouches.
Took 81 days to complete. An infant died and 2 pregnant women lost fetuses.
Recalled nearly 2 million bottles due to contamination.
So this product potentially jeopardized lives, and they left it on shelves for close to a year?
That would be correct.
The FDA is failing you. The government agency made to protect us from corporate greed let hundreds of thousands get sick and thousands die every year. With extremely slow response times, vague rules, and not regulating potentially deadly products, the FDA no longer meets the basic safety food requirements of most Americans. Let me explain. The FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, started in 1906 when Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. At the time, they desperately needed something to prevent the manufacture, sale, or transportation of misbranded or poisonous food and drugs. And when I say desperately, I mean a soothing syrup for babies had morphine in it. And I mean, the morphine obviously worked, and the company made a lot of money, but at the expense of their consumers' health. It didn't end there though. They added chalk to milk, copper sulfate to peas, and even poisoned soldiers with disease and embalmed meat. Like, they would bring a child to the brink of death for one extra sale. And these might be stories now, but real people were being poisoned by their foods and didn't even know. Like, imagine giving your toddler milk to help them grow big and strong, and they die a slow, painful death of tuberculosis. Like, this stuff was dark. All this to say, the American public was treated like livestock. Feed them as much as possible for as little as possible and hope they make it. Actually, no, I think farmers treat their animals better than that, right? So obviously, Americans got tired, and that's when Congress invented the FDA. They understood that without proper regulation, people get sick and die from their food. Yet in 2024, 118 years later, people are still getting sick and dying from their food. And I'm not exaggerating either. Infected baby formula recently killed and hospitalized multiple babies, and I see a new article about a new product being recalled every day. So how are these deadly products constantly getting past the organization that's supposed to protect us? Where did it go wrong? Well, after a lot of research, I traced its downfall to 1958, when Congress passed the Food Additive Amendments Act. It required the FDA to ban any and all cancer-causing additives. Unfortunately, this amendment created a really exploited loophole that has allowed additives in our food that the FDA might not even know about. The generally recognized as safe loophole, which started with a simple idea. There's just some stuff we know isn't gonna hurt us. Vinegar, baking soda, table salt, or just stuff that's been generally recognized as safe amongst experts, qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate its safety. The amendment also states that the safety should be adequately shown through scientific procedures. Now that sounds so great in theory, but couldn't companies just hire scientists with really high salaries and tell them what to find? No, because if I just thought of that, there's no way experienced policymakers with fully developed brains would not have thought of that. So they left it up to their newest creation, the FDA, to specify who these experts could be. The FDA could even determine how much training and experience they had to have and how much power they would have themselves in validating the result. This is great. Companies couldn't just lie and say the glowy green substance they created is generally considered as safe. Oh, one sec. Okay, so I've just heard the FDA, being the very big and smart organization they are, completely gave up this power to companies and created a voluntary reporting system. Y'all, my jaw actually dropped. That means any organization without proof can claim that they've tested anything and we wouldn't know until people got sick from it. That's not even it though, it gets worse. Companies that do submit this voluntary report can either get a no question from the FDA, meaning yes, they've tested it thoroughly, or the FDA can question if they've tested it enough. Either way, the company can start using the ingredient since they get to decide if it's generally recognized as safe. Wait, pick up your jaw, it gets worse. The voluntary submission is exactly that, voluntary. So any company can just test a new ingredient, put it in our food, not tell the FDA, and just kind of hope it works out. So you and I don't know how many new generally recognized as safe ingredients are added to our food because there's no requirement to report them. And technically a company could just not do any safety review at all, which is illegal, but we wouldn't know because they don't have to prove anything. Okay, now you can drop your jaw. Now this sounds awful, dangerous, concerning, but let's look at it from a realistic perspective. What's a business's primary goal? profit, and they make profit by convincing people to buy their product or service. It's in their own best interest to not poison their consumers. That leads to bad press, less return customers, and less money, which is kind of the kryptonite. So I think and I hope that most companies will go through the testing so they don't risk getting a bad rep. I wish I could say big companies test these products for our health, but considering Nestle puts sugar in baby formula, it seems they do not care. This flawed system obviously leads to a lot of warning letters and recalls, but after the damage has already been done. A really unfortunate example is a high protein ingredient that was marketed as a clean, natural source of protein. It ended up poisoning 400 people, hospitalized 133, and there are even reports of organ damage. How did this happen? Well, Daily Harvest decided to use Terra flour in their lentil leek crumbles, and I'm assuming they thought it was okay because Terra is already used as a food additive. But they used Terra flour within 1 year of it being added to our food supply. It kind of feels like we were just the guinea pigs. Eating Well asked a bunch of experts why they believe the outbreak happened, and they gave a lot of theories, but ultimately they didn't know. No one knows enough about Terra flour, yet a $1 billion food delivery service could just add it to our food. Now, obviously the FDA has declared Terra flour as not generally recognized as safe, but after it had already hurt hundreds of people. Just a quick side thing, if my voice sounds different from the other videos, which it does, it's because I am very sick at the moment, and I'm just recording this video so I can get it out to you guys in June. If I do not, I was too sick. So yeah, let's get back to the video. They are still doing their job because ultimately they enforced the law and kept thousands more from getting hurt. But then why are so many Americans getting sick from ultra-processed foods? Why is the FDA seemingly nowhere to be found when processed meats are level 1 carcinogens, our additives are banned in other countries, and our food is straight up making us sick? Quite frankly, I don't know. I won't deny that the FDA obviously plays a big part in making sure our food is safe, and I will get into that more later, but we also can't deny that the FDA sometimes fails miserably at implementing new research and even enforcing laws. Like, why can't I just straight up think of 2 cancer-causing additives off the top of my head? Purely from a moral perspective, shouldn't those be banned? But morality aside, federal law is clear. Additives that cause cancer in animals or humans are not considered safe and should not be approved by the FDA. Except they seem to let a couple slide. One of them disrupts your hormone production systems, which can have devastating effects on your immune and reproductive system. And obviously, it can induce cancer. The thing is though, bisulfonyl A or BPAs aren't technically added directly into your food. They're used to line packaging like bottle caps, cans, or even the plastic for microwavable food. But do we maybe see a problem with that? That's right, it leaks into your food over time, and heat makes it leak faster. It's to the point where BPA exposure is so widespread that most people over the age of 6 have measurable amounts of BPAs in their urine. That breakfast bowl doesn't really feel worth it anymore. This is common knowledge though, because if I, a random 17-year-old with internet access, could find it, then I'm hoping a big boy government organization could find it as well. So, what are they doing about it? Well, in 2012, they banned manufacturers from using BPAs in baby formula cans, baby bottles, and sippy cups. Great. And 2 long years later, they finally announced to the public that exposure of under 2.25 milligrams per pound of body weight a day is safe. And most people are only exposed to 0.1 to 0.2 micrograms anyway, so it's all good. However, there is emerging research that suggests that even the safe amounts may cause health problems. But the point of this whole thing is to address the FDA's response. XYZ is safe at said levels, so we deem it safe. But what about things with similar toxic effects? Let's say A and B both affect my liver, but it takes 1 milligram of A to do any harm. Eating half a milligram of A would be safe, but what happens if I add half a milligram of B as well? I don't know if I explained that well, but the Food Additive Amendment Act states that the cumulative effects of different additives must be taken into account when assessing the safety of new additives. Yet food manufacturers and regulators have truly neglected to assess this, which could be very harmful. Maybe I'm reaching with that, but there are just straight up things that are not banned despite heavy research telling the FDA, hey, this thing isn't safe. One of the biggest ones being brominated vegetable oil. Research about how dangerous it is started coming out as early as the 70s, and the FDA did respond by limiting it. Basically, the research found that it could accumulate in body fat over time and cause reproductive and developmental problems. in animal models. And the FDA obviously went off research they had at the time, and they determined it to be inconclusive, so that's why they didn't ban it. However, researchers did not give up, and they started researching again in the 2000s. The FDA didn't really look into it though like that until the 2010s when it started getting a lot of media attention. And finally, in November 2023, they concluded that BVO is toxic, and they haven't outright banned it yet because they're still in the public comment stage, but they most likely will. Don't worry though, products with BVOs have to have it on their ingredients list, so a lot of companies just got rid of it entirely. But it's technically still allowed in our food until their final ruling. And the research on this dangerous ingredient started coming out in the 70s. I get it, the FDA has a lot on its plate and it can't perfectly regulate everything. Humans aren't perfect, but I feel like a system designed to keep millions of people safe should be pretty close to perfect. But as we can see from all its shortcomings, the FDA may not function as well as we expected it to. Before researching for this video, I expected more proactive measures or at least a quicker response time to keep us safe. However, what we have is an organization that took 2 years to ban an additive that led to organ damage. No, you didn't just hear that, 2 years to finish their investigation and declare it unsafe for human consumption. I think the hundreds of people in the hospital could have told y'all that. And the company that used the additive in the first place reported that it was a terraflower within like a month of the recall. Their slow response time is dangerous, but not uncommon. Don't get me wrong, they'll usually investigate as soon as there's an outbreak, but the process from investigation to action is long, and by the time they've reacted, hundreds of people may have already gotten hurt. And again, these are real people that can't afford a medical bill, people that can't afford to miss a paycheck, people that cannot afford the childcare while they're in the hospital. And this all happens because the FDA is built in a way that focuses on protecting us after the damage has been done. And this is literally how it was designed by Congress. The only reason they even implemented pre-market testing for drugs was because one elixir, that was untested of course, killed over 100 people, including a lot of children. Just a personal opinion, but I'm assuming they built it this way from a resource allocation standpoint, because they take so long to test one thing after an outbreak that imagine how bad it would be if they had to test 10,000 additives. That's not a hyperbole, by the way. Their slow response times is due to a lot of factors, obviously all the bureaucracy, but also apparently the FDA has a hard time holding on to people. Like, their turnover rate is double of a government-wide average, so obviously they just don't have enough people to keep it running efficiently. This means less inspections, monitoring, and enforcement, and this means that more companies get to get away with God knows what. Just so you can understand, the FDA inspected 4,535 US food and cosmetics manufacturing facilities in 2021, compared to the 10,641 in 2011. Which, yes, the pandemic happened, but the numbers were falling even before then. Again, these failures have real impact. Real people, including children, get hurt by this malpractice. The FDA waited months to inspect the Abbott facility after hearing its formula could be contaminated. And they didn't even tell the public for weeks after confirming that it was. In total, it took them over a year to do anything after the whistleblower email was sent. The given reason is that the email was archived by some employee, and I choose to believe it. I choose to believe it's just from being understaffed or from some structural issues, because I don't really want to believe they were trying to sweep it under the rug. Because knowingly letting babies be poisoned for weeks would be scary and bad, so I'm gonna go with the better option. Because a lot of organizations have heavily criticized the FDA's reactive nature, Congress passed the Food Modernization Act in 2011. Yay, it emphasized prevention. Do you want to guess when they actually fully implemented it? That's right, in May of 2024! 13 years, people! That's a whole 8th grader. Can you imagine the amount of outbreaks that could have been prevented? The amount of illnesses that people didn't have to go through? But hey, at least it's done, right? And we'll get more into what it actually does later, but the point of all this was to show why the FDA has all these issues, and it seems to boil down to just not having enough resources to oversee 80% of Americans' food supply. That being said, they are doing a lot of things right with what they have. I mean, babies aren't giving morphine anymore, so we gotta be doing something right. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a bit, because this is one of those topics that just isn't black and white. It's really easy to criticize the wide array of flaws and mistakes the FDA has made, but this video isn't that long. So here are some really good things the FDA has managed to accomplish, and honestly, these are things that I've taken for granted for way too long. For one, do we ever notice how detailed nutrition labels are? They list all the added sugars, ingredients, allergens, and even have a minimum font size so we can choose what we put into our bodies. Now, are they as transparent as they could be? No. I literally have an entire video on just how one ingredient could be over 100 chemicals. So there's definitely room for improvement, but another accomplishment was requiring calorie counts to be on chain restaurant menus. I am honestly so glad that's a thing because it helped me beat a fast food problem I had back in the day. Like, how is one burger 1,150 calories? That worries me because what could you possibly put in that? Are they just pumping the meats full of lard? And this might be a little tangent, but I've come to accept the reality that, like, oh yeah, this is gonna be so many calories, but like, why is a cheeseburger and fries 2,230? That's not a normal thing. But let's get back to the FDA thing. Many others like me get to be in control and make healthier choices even when we do eat out, because life happens. You have random cravings, social events, you're in a rush, whatever. What I love most about it is that big fast food chains now actually make an effort to include low calorie options or just reasonable items. Are they the healthiest? No, they definitely still have a lot of stuff I cannot make in my kitchen. But it is less of whatever is in that 1,000 calorie burger, so I'm happy about that. It did take the FDA 8 years though. 8 years from when Congress asked for it in the Affordable Care Act to when they actually implemented it in 2018. And there were a lot of food companies lobbying to stop this. That being said, the FDA structure definitely has its flaws, but it also has a lot of advantages. One of them being they will never stop testing and learning. And yes, it is reactive, but once they find out there's an issue, they tend to keep hundreds more from getting hurt. And the organization is made up of humans, so they can really only work with the resources they have. It would be nearly impossible to constantly check the safety of all 10,000 additives in our food. But once they get new data, they act accordingly. A good example is them banning something extremely harmful that had been in our food for centuries. Artificial trans fats increase our bad cholesterol while decreasing the good one. It was basically perfectly priming you for a heart attack. It also had other issues, but we won't really get into that. I do want to point out though, just as a little side note, that we had been eating this stuff for over a century because it was generally recognized as safe by food companies. And it took a lot of independent parties to get the FDA to even pay attention and like test it to make sure that it was safe. So even more proof that this is a very flawed and possibly deadly way of doing things. But tangent aside, the FDA is trying to improve on that. Now that they've implemented the Food Safety and Modernization Act, they're moving towards a more preventative approach to food safety. They've recognized that they just don't have enough people to keep the system running efficiently, so they're being much smarter about it now by using technology. In order to make sure food factories are following basic health regulations, they're implementing remote monitoring technologies. So like cameras, AI, drones, stuff like that. As you can see, the FDA is a very useful organization. It definitely has an important purpose and the right intentions, but just questionable execution. But in the end, they are the most organized thing keeping food safe in America. They set safety standards so companies have something to be held accountable to. This spans all the way from how food factories should be run to the frigging font size on nutrition labels. All this to say, I am really grateful I live in a country where that's a thing. A lot of people in other countries aren't fortunate enough to have this level of government oversight, so reporting harmful things in food wouldn't do anything. At least we know that if we make enough noise, they will eventually step in. Now that you have all the facts, here's my opinion on all this, and I know the entire video I've been giving my opinion, but this part isn't research. It's literally just me saying the stuff in my brain, just spitting it out onto YouTube. So I personally see a design flaw in the FDA's reactive nature even after the Food Modernization Act, but I also understand that it would take a lot of resources to check every new ingredient. Quite frankly though, I'd wait for the testing. I think anyone would. Like, I would rather wait 2 years for that new chocolate bar than have my limbs fall off or something. The thing is, we don't even need the FDA to do all the tests. Like, there are 10,000 food additives in our food supply. That would be impossible. but any knowledgeable third party could perform these tests, because I truly believe these companies would give us heroin if they could pass it off. But hey, say we allow these companies to test their product. They should really be held to a higher standard than voluntary reporting and no consequences if they're caught lying. And I won't name names, but I personally don't think a certain billion-dollar company tested Terra flour very much. But no fines, no fees, they just get to say my bad while someone is left without their organ. Again, this is just my opinion, but it really feels like the FDA is scared to upset big food corporations at our expense. They really take their time even after independent parties find out stuff is harmful, like PFAS or trans fats. And why did it take them weeks to alert the public that baby formula was poisoning their kids? I don't know, to me it just feels like public health is as important as economics, and I think one should take clear priority over the other. I should mention that that facility shutting down led to, or at least contributed heavily to, the baby formula shortage that we saw. So maybe the FDA was scared of that. I don't really know. I just wish I could say that, like, oh, these companies will test their products because human decency, but again, sugar in baby formula. And yes, I will keep bringing that up because they hurt the purest form of life for a quick buck. And that makes me so sad. This is a quick tangent, but remembering that these evil, greedy corporations are run by real human beings is kind of depressing. Like, a group of people are each so corrupt that they would do absolutely soulless things for money they don't even need. Human greed fascinates and terrifies me at the same time. Anyway, back to the FDA, the reason you're watching this. I don't really know how to solve this. I think we're moving in the right direction though with the Food Modernization Act. The organization just needs to take way more of a preventative approach and get independent third parties to test these new additives. Other than that, I don't know. Let me know if you have any other ideas. But with everything you know now, the good and the bad, how does it affect your trust in the food industry? Does it make you feel safer because it's not anarchy, or are you skeptical? Maybe instead of looking at it from a critical light, you choose to look at how they're improving, because they really are, and they do eventually implement new research to keep us safe. Because they really are, and they do eventually implement new research to keep us safe. Obviously, I made this video to look at the FDA's shortcomings, but I did try and look at the nuances and give different perspectives, because I don't want my content to be rage content. I want to present all the facts and give a rounded look at things, and if you ever feel like I'm not doing that, please let me know, respectfully. Please do comment your thoughts though, because I read every single one of y'all's comments and they're actually really interesting. And since you've probably learned something, maybe consider subscribing. My entire channel is just weird or shady health related stuff, and you seem to be into that, so I don't know, seems like we're made for each other. My goal is to reach 300 subscribers by August, my birthday, so it would be an early birthday gift. Either way, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to see your comments, and I'll see you in my next video.